He once said, "You're not smart because you watched a documentary." That's Bill Burr. Brutally honest, unapologetically raw, and for many, disturbingly right. In a world that's becoming increasingly sanitized, filtered, and afraid of offense, here's a man who walks on stage and slices through the noise like a sledgehammer through glass. But here's the real twist. Bill Burr isn't just a comedian. He's a philosopher in disguise. Behind every punchline, there's a worldview. Beneath the laughter, there's a quiet war on bullshit. And if you think his anger is just an act, you haven't been paying attention. Because for Burr, comedy isn't an escape from life. It's a direct confrontation with it. Born in Canton, Massachusetts, Bill Burr didn't come from privilege. He worked in warehouses, drove forklifts, and crawled through the daily grind like most working-class Americans. And maybe that's why his comedy cuts so deep, because it doesn't come from theory. It comes from bruises, from failures, from watching the world pretend to be polite while quietly falling apart. Burr's journey to the top of stand-up wasn't clean. It was chaotic, full of setbacks, and paved with moments that could have broken anyone less stubborn. And yet, what emerged from that storm was not just a comic, but a cultural critic with a mic. Listen to his specials, and you'll see the pattern. He mocks outrage culture not just because it's easy, but because he believes it's dangerous. He roasts political correctness, not to be edgy, but because he sees how it kills real conversation. His bits on marriage, feminism, race, they're not safe. They're not polished. But they are brutally human. And that's the point. Burr is willing to say what most people are afraid to even think. He doesn't care if you agree. He cares if you flinch. Because that flinch, that uncomfortable laugh, that's where the truth lives. And maybe that's the real power of comedy, not to make us laugh, but to make us look. To confront the absurdities we normalize, the lies we tell ourselves, the fragility we hide behind. Burr's comedy forces the mirror up, and it doesn't come with a warning label. He doesn't want to soothe you. He wants to shake you. He didn't arrive at this level of clarity overnight. Burr's early career was far from glamorous. He was performing in dingy clubs, facing hecklers struggling to be heard over the sound of clinking glasses. And yet, those very experiences carved his style direct, unfiltered, allergic to pretense. He wasn't trying to be liked. He was trying to be real. And in that commitment to authenticity, he tapped into something that most comedians only skim: human nature. When Bill Burr talks about anger, it isn't performative. It's rooted in real frustration with a world that often feels rigged. When he dissects relationships, he isn't parroting self-help cliches. He's speaking as someone who's wrestled with ego control, vulnerability. And when he mocks political correctness, it's not out of ignorance, it's out of a refusal to let groupthink silence nuance. The irony is that the more offensive people say he is, the more honest his message becomes. Because Burr doesn't pretend to be enlightened. He admits he's flawed. He admits he's figuring it out as he goes. And maybe that's why he resonates with millions. In a culture obsessed with perfection, he makes imperfection feel like a kind of truth. His 2019 Netflix special Paper Tiger is a prime example. Set in London, it's a masterclass in saying the unsayable. Burr takes on feminism, outrage mobs, cultural hypocrisy, and he does it with precision. Not because he hates these topics, but because he wants to strip away the fluff and get to the root. And at the root, what you find is these people are scared to talk. Scared to be wrong, scared to offend. Burr isn't. And that fearlessness is exactly what makes him vital. But what's more revealing is how Burr balances that fire with introspection. In recent interviews and podcasts, you'll find a man who's evolved. He talks about therapy, about learning to listen, about understanding his childhood traumas. He's married now, a father. And that version of Bill, the one who's still angry but more self-aware, might just be his most compelling yet. Because now his jokes don't just attack the world. They question his own place in it. And that shift matters. It shows that growth isn't about abandoning who you are. It's about understanding why you are that way in the first place. Take his commentary on social media. Burr doesn't just dismiss it as toxic noise. He breaks it down as a machine for validation, outrage, and artificial tribalism. It's not a conversation, he says. It's a scoreboard. And he's right. Most of us aren't communicating, we're competing, trying to win points instead of understanding each other. Burr's refusal to engage in that game is refreshing. It's rebellious in the truest sense. In a world where everyone's building a brand, he's still just telling the truth, no matter how messy it sounds. And then there's his take on masculinity, one of the most controversial yet important aspects of his comedy. Bill Burr doesn't tiptoe around the shifting definitions of what it means to be a man in modern society. Instead, he charges into that conversation head first, armed with brutal honesty and lived experience. He talks about how men were raised to bury emotions, to man up, to never cry, never talk about fear, never ask for help. And he exposes how that kind of upbringing doesn't create strength, it creates ticking time bombs. In one bit, he compares emotional repression to putting a lid on a boiling pot. Eventually, it blows. And the audience laughs, but they also nod. Because they know it's true. Burr isn't mocking vulnerability, he's advocating for it in the only language he knows: raw, unfiltered truth wrapped in a punchline. What makes Burr's perspective so potent is that he never positions himself as a victim. Even when he talks about growing up with an emotionally distant father or struggling with his own temper, he doesn't blame the world. He looks inward. He questions his own programming. He even jokes that therapy felt like trying to fix a car while it's still moving. That line isn't just funny, it's deeply accurate. And that's the brilliance of his comedy. It delivers profound truths disguised as offhand remarks. His audience may come for the laughs, but they leave with something more. A glimpse into the psychology of modern manhood, frustration, change, and identity. And let's talk about failure. Burr doesn't hide from it. He embraces it. He's bombed on stage. He's said the wrong thing. He's been hated, boycotted, misunderstood. And yet, instead of retreating, he sharpened his edge. Because Burr understands something most people don't: failure is the tuition you pay for growth. It's not a stop sign, it's a signal to dig deeper. His career didn't skyrocket overnight. He spent 2 decades grinding before becoming a household name. And even now, he's not universally adored. He's polarizing. But he wears that like armor. Because to him, being liked by everyone is a red flag. It means you're not saying anything real. What's more shocking is how he's become one of the most insightful voices of our time without ever claiming to be. He doesn't preach. He doesn't present himself as woke or wise. He just talks fiercely, fearlessly, and without a filter. And that ironically makes him one of the few public figures people actually trust. When Bill Burr speaks, it's not rehearsed. It's not designed to trend. It's messy, flawed, human. And in today's hyper-curated world, that's more radical than any political speech. One of the most profound aspects of Bill Burr's philosophy is his belief in personal accountability. He doesn't believe the world owes him anything. In fact, he actively mocks that mindset. The universe doesn't owe you a dream job, he once said. It owes you nothing. That single idea, repeated in various forms across his stand-up routines, interviews, and podcasts, is the cornerstone of his worldview. And it's a message many people don't want to hear, especially in an age where victimhood is often rewarded with attention. Burr cuts through that noise with the sharp edge of responsibility. If your life is a mess, fix it. If you're angry, figure out why. If you keep screwing up, maybe it's not everyone else's fault. That kind of self-directed philosophy isn't trendy, but it's powerful. And it's what separates Burr from comedians who just chase applause lines. He's not here to comfort you. He's here to challenge you. And then there's the issue of cancel culture, a topic Burr addresses head-on. Unlike others who dodge or deny its existence, he calls it what it is, a form of social purging masked as progress. He acknowledges that yes, some people deserve to be held accountable, but he also questions the mob mentality, the erasure of context, and the idea that people can't grow. How long do I have to pay for my mistake? He asks in one rant. What's the statute of limitations on being a jackass? These aren't rhetorical questions. They're real concerns about the way society is evolving or devolving. Burr's stance isn't anti-accountability. It's pro-nuance, and that's a distinction most critics conveniently ignore. He's also been one of the few comedians brave enough to critique the very industry he's a part of. Hollywood hypocrisy. He mocks it mercilessly. Award shows, he calls them what they are, performative back-patting. Even his own success doesn't shield him from self-examination. Burr often jokes that he doesn't understand how he got famous or why anyone listens to him. But of course, deep down, he knows. People are starved for honesty. For someone who talks like a real human, not a PR robot. And in a cultural climate where every sentence is triple-checked by handlers and consultants, Burr's rawness is magnetic. There's a recurring theme in his work, the idea that the world is insane, and the only way to survive it is through brutal self-awareness. Not narcissism, not blame, but actual gut-wrenching introspection. And comedy for Burr is the tool he uses to do that. It's not just entertainment, it's his form of therapy, his battlefield, his confession booth. And when he walks on stage, what you're watching isn't just a performance. It's a man wrestling with the contradictions of modern life out loud in real time. Perhaps the most compelling part of Bill Burr's evolution is how his rage has transformed. Early in his career, his comedy was a fire hose of frustration aimed at everything from relationships to politics to daily life. But over time, that fire didn't extinguish it, refined. Instead of lashing out, Burr started dissecting his own anger. Why was he always on edge? Why did everything piss him off? The answers didn't come easy, but they came honestly. In one of his podcast episodes, Burr admits that much of his anger was rooted in fear. Fear of not being good enough. Fear of being exposed. Fear of losing control. And that moment when a man like Bill Burr, who built an entire persona on never backing down, admits fear, that's when you realize this isn't just comedy. It's catharsis. Not just for him, but for everyone listening. What makes Burr so unpredictable and so magnetic is his refusal to be boxed in. He's not liberal. He's not conservative. He's not playing for a team. And that independence is his greatest weapon. Because while other comedians tiptoe around ideologies afraid of losing followers, Burr takes a flamethrower to all of them. He'll roast feminists and incels in the same breath. He'll make fun of Trump and Biden in the same set, not because he wants to offend everyone, but because he wants to expose hypocrisy everywhere. And that's a dying art. In today's comedy landscape, most stand-ups are either pandering to their base or terrified of losing their platform. Burr. He already assumes you're going to get mad, and he still says it anyway. And yet for all his ferocity, there's a strange tenderness at the core of his worldview. He doesn't believe people are evil. He believes they're stupid, scared, confused. And that belief shows in his commentary. When he talks about outrage mobs, he's not just blaming them, he's analyzing the insecurity that fuels them. When he mocks entitled behavior, it's because he sees what entitlement does. It weakens you. It convinces you that discomfort is injustice. And Burr's entire philosophy is built around the opposite idea that discomfort is essential, that you don't grow without friction, that the world doesn't bend to your feelings, and that's a good thing. Even his jokes about fatherhood are drenched in this philosophy. He doesn't portray himself as a perfect dad. Far from it. He talks about losing his temper, about trying not to replicate the emotional neglect he experienced, about learning day by day how to be better. And in doing so, he paints a picture that's both brutally honest and deeply human. Because at the heart of all his comedy, Burr isn't trying to be a hero. He's trying to be real. And in a society obsessed with branding and curation, real is rare. Real is disruptive. Real is, quite frankly, dangerous. And it's that danger that keeps audiences coming back. Because in a world where everything feels scripted, where authenticity is often just another marketing tactic, Bill Burr is the anomaly. He doesn't give you the version of himself that sells best. He gives you the messy, contradictory, angry, reflective, evolving human being that he actually is. He admits he's still learning how to communicate without yelling. He confesses that he overreacts, that he struggles with control, that he's constantly trying to undo the conditioning of a childhood where emotional expression was seen as weakness. These aren't weaknesses in his comedy. They're the foundation of it. And that's what makes his art not just funny, but vital. Burr uses humor not as a shield, but as a scalpel. And while other comedians chase applause, he goes straight for the nerve. He's also one of the few public figures who consistently punches up and down because he believes no one is above scrutiny and no one is beneath it. This makes him impossible to categorize and deeply unsettling to those who rely on clear ideological lines. His comedy creates cognitive dissonance. You'll find yourself laughing at something you thought was off limits, then questioning why you laughed, then realizing maybe the boundary was never real to begin with. That's what Burr's comedy does. It doesn't just entertain. It interrogates. It holds up a mirror to the audience and says, "Are you sure you're as virtuous as you think you are?" That question, asked repeatedly in different ways across his career, is what makes Burr's work more than stand-up. It makes it cultural autopsy. And here's what might shock you even more. Burr doesn't enjoy being the center of attention. In interviews, he often mentions how fame makes him uncomfortable, how being recognized in public doesn't feed his ego, it drains it. He never set out to be a celebrity. He just wanted to make people laugh and maybe in the process figure himself out. That reluctance to play the fame game is another reason people trust him. He's not selling you a lifestyle. He's not building a brand empire. He's just telling jokes and bleeding truth into every one of them. Perhaps his most subversive message is this: stop pretending you're perfect. Burr believes that the most dangerous lie in modern society is the illusion of moral purity. That people pretend they're flawless online, cancel others, to mask their own guilt and live in denial about their own darkness. His answer: own your flaws. Laugh at them. Work on them. But don't pretend they don't exist. Because pretending doesn't make you better. It makes you blind. And blindness, in Burr's world, is the greatest threat of all. Not just to personal growth, but to societal survival. He's not asking you to agree with him. In fact, he expects that you won't. But he is daring you to think, to feel, to confront. And that is a far greater gift than comfort. In a world addicted to outrage and validation, Burr offers something far rarer: clarity, brutal, uncomfortable, necessary clarity. And maybe that's the reason Bill Burr has endured not just as a comedian, but as a cultural voice. Because in a world where people are obsessed with being liked, he chose to be honest. In a time where everyone performs virtue for clicks, he admits to being a flawed, sometimes petty, always evolving human being. And in a culture that punishes mistakes more than it rewards growth, he dares to ask, what happened to redemption? What happened to the idea that people can learn, change, improve? His entire philosophy can be distilled into one brutal, necessary truth. You are not entitled to comfort, but you are capable of growth. So maybe the real reason Burr matters isn't because he's funny. It's because he reminds us that comedy at its best is truth-telling. And truth is rarely polite. It's messy. It's uncomfortable. It's often offensive. But it's also liberating. And in a world choking on safe lies, Burr's dangerous honesty is a kind of salvation. Now here's the question we all have to ask ourselves. Are we really offended by what Bill Burr says, or are we uncomfortable with how much of it might be true? Let me know your thoughts in the comments. Was he just being provocative, or was he holding up a mirror? And more importantly, do we even want to look